I'm Limo Milan. In this video, we're going to look at arranging songs in Ableton Live's arrangement view. So the function of this video is to show you a couple of different workflows you can use to go from a beginning idea with a couple of song sections and get it fully laid out, and some tips as you can try and make some modifications to make it a bit more interesting as well. So first I'll play you the example that I put together. So as you can hear, there's some main introduction sections, this first 16 bars here. We've got a breakdown style section. We've got a main drop with additional layers and so on. And then we've got an alternate B section. It's not necessarily got a function yet, it's just another idea that I'd come up with. So the first thing you can do when you're working like this is you can first try and identify what these sections are. And you've got two main methods of doing this. You can add locators in and give them a name and work this way. So I'm just control clicking, right clicking to add these in. And the other option is you can rename the clips and give those the name as well, whichever works for you in terms of a visual function. The only advantage of using the locators is that you can click them to jump to the playback of those. You can also key or MIDI map those as well, so you can have some keys to dart around your arrangement as you work. That's more for when you've got things fully laid out though. So from this point, a good thing to think about is how are we going to go from this point to laying it out into the main form of a typical arrangement of this type of music. We'll keep it fairly simple. So the introduction could be 16 bars, or maybe it could be 32 bars. It can't obviously do the same thing for those, but we'll look at ways of creating efficient variations to these as time moves on. So one thing we can do is the very clunky, long-winded way of trying to create a 32 bar section would be to highlight everything and drag it out the way and make space for duplicating another part. But a better way of doing this is to just use the duplicate time command. So I've clicked one of the clips to make sure that the correct duration of 16 bars is actually highlighted. Don't need to necessarily highlight all the different tracks, but if we do duplicate time, that will then duplicate that section to become a 32 bar section. And it could be that the breakdown also lasts for twice as long as well. I'm not sure yet on that. The breakdown most likely will want to be a bit longer. So let's do duplicate time for that. And then our alternate B section. In my mind, I'm thinking that might work as a segue. So it's kind of a middle eight between one of the main sections of the drop and to get to a breakdown again as well. So if I'm being mindful of the timeline here. Again, we're going for what's typical of the style of music. So A radio edit kind of length, 3 to 4 minutes might be a good ending destination. So if we think about that, we could grab our drop and just alt drag and place that, maybe place that there, leaving a 16 bar section for my my second breakdown. Remember, using that alt B section as a segue, and then grab that breakdown and drag that to here. And then again, we're keeping it simple, so it could be that we then just use the intro as an outro and alt drag that to the end point as well. Now, if I change my mind at any point, so let's say, for instance, I'd just highlight that and I'd done the duplicate time. So this time I'm going to do Shift, Command and D, which is the shortcut keys for that. Let's say that I've actually changed my mind and that breakdown lasts way too long the second time. It should be the same as the first breakdown. It works in that respect. We can do delete time and just get rid of that as well. So there's duplicate time and delete time in terms of the options that we have, and also paste time too, where you can just copy from somewhere and then insert it to another section. So we've got a main framework for an arrangement here. The next thing to think about is just how are we going to, keep the listener interested? How are we going to have this duration of playback, all these song sections, but allow there to be different alterations to the parts to, again, to keep the listener interested from the point you first grab their attention. So let's have a look at something that I coin as arrangement thinning. So if I do Alt and click one of these tracks, the expand view, we'll see all tracks at one time. So I'm just going to do that so I can see everything and every part in greater detail. Now you notice I've gone for a numbering system on most of these clips as well, which is quite useful to go for. So the first time I made an idea, I've put the number 1 after it, and then when I've made an alternate version of an idea, I've given it a number 2. So this is a good example. That's the monotone version of the bass, and then it looks like that's an alternate version of the bass where it's doing a higher register arpeggiated part by the looks of it. So it's got a clear, distinct name. Now you can give them full names. That's something you can do. But I'd rather spend less time thinking about what I'm going to name things, and I'd rather just give them clear numbers. If you've got an alternate version, let's say that this is the same as number 2 here, but for the second breakdown, I want it to do something slightly different. So again, for demonstration purposes, if I just grab that bass and pop it to a higher register, it probably won't work. I might have to change this when we come back to it. But rather than it being 2, I can do Command and R to rename it and do 2.1. And then same starting number, but a decimal number afterwards. It's just a really easy way of keeping your head around, why that part might be unique to the other one and so on as well. Really easy when you need to go and borrow parts from different places as well. So yeah, let's have a look at this arrangement thinning. So we've got our main introduction going on. We've got, let's have a listen actually and just remind myself what's in this. So let's just figure out what's going on. So there's a bass section there, which may work running throughout or may benefit from being muted for the first 16 bars, and then the second 16 bars is where it comes in. If we just press 0, we can deactivate that clip. The advantage of doing deactivation rather than deletion is you have the option to opt back in and have that part in, so you have a bit more flexibility. Visually, it's not as clear as obviously deleting it, but that's a compromise that I think is worthwhile having. So technically, although I'm arrangement thinning, that also falls under the premise of this being subtractive arrangements, which is where you subtract from a dense arrangement and you then choose what plays at what points in your arrangement as well. So we're moving slightly into that kind of concept. So let's go back into the arrangement thinning concept. So I'm actually going to opt in. I've highlighted the portion of that bass, and I just want it to be so it's every 4th bar that it's being teased in. So one, it's more exciting that the bass is coming in on those points, and secondly, it gets the listener used to the fact that bass is going to come in. So it's a good way of teasing it. So that works. If we're thinking of build, increase in energy, crescendo up to a certain point, One thing we could think of is taking this concept of arrangement thinning and thinking it more as data thinning and going another sub-level behind the scenes. So if I go into the clip itself, now each one of these is unique to the other. They're not shared in terms of the data. So when this one plays, maybe I'll use the same command, 0, and deactivate every other note. And maybe leave that last one in so it has a little roll at the end. Let's see what that sounds like. And that makes that unique to this one here. Now, if you want to stay with the concept of making sure that you're keeping a tab on these ideas, don't forget you can put in your decimal point there. If you don't want to deal with the numbers, another option is you just give it a unique color so you know that you've made that one different to the rest of them. Technically, though, that should be that one because I've made that one unique to the other repeats there. And I really like that. It gives a really good groove now. So I'm going to just slowly let the part get to the fully realized part, which happens at bar 17. And I can already see that we're starting to expect that this is going to be the roll that happens for the bass. And in order to accent what's going to happen at bar 17, we can, deactivate that and not have it happen at all. So it's a surprise that this time it doesn't happen. Oh, and then at bar 17, the whole bass part comes in. Or we can either chop out by highlighting or resize the duration of the clip, so there's a rest basically for that part. Now, if we're talking about this data thinning, arrangement thinning concept as well, what can be useful to go for is to just basically thin out other elements as well. So it may not be all of them, it might be too sparse if they're all doing it, but if we just create a loop point here, so it's half before the next section and half on the next one, so Commander now, we can listen to that just pre and then actual new song section and play around with how sparse we can make it, and then that helps sell the information that's present on the next song section. Okay, that works well. If you can give yourself a bit more of a lead in time if you want to see what that sounds like in context of everything else. Right, so again, looking at, this can obviously apply with every song section. We won't necessarily have time to do this level of detail with all of them. I just want to make sure I'm covering the concept. So this is an interesting point where we've got a repeat of the same thing, and it's this kind of drone-like sound that originally I think was let's have a look. It's a piano, but it's gone through extensive processing to manipulate it and give it a different character. So it sounds like this. So another way of kind of thinking about this in a different way could be that maybe we offset the start position of it. And if you look, it's a slip editing process. So maybe if I put it there, it means that we're going to do what we call like a rhythmic displacement idea here. So I'm taking what normally falls on a downbeat as the second instance, and again I'm modifying this, so let's just give that a different color. And I'm deliberately offsetting it, so it's by half a bar that I'm offsetting it. It might actually work better that it's just a beat, and therefore it'll flip it onto the off beat rather than on the beat. If we've got all the other parts in here, it'll be an interesting association of that part with all the other elements, which will continue in the second section of the intro, except in this case, that drone is going to shift where its placement is, and it'll just create a completely different feel to the part. So let's try this out. So that drone sound happening on bar 17 on the beat gives it a much more unified feeling, whereas earlier on it's a strange kind of less predictable in a way feeling of when those drones will happen. So it really helps emphasize a shift. Even though a lot of this information is repeating, it helps emphasize a shift in the way it feels. So let's have a look at how automation can be used when we're doing builds and so on as well. So I'm just thinking, let's go to our main drop. Now, one thing I know on the main drop is that I wanted to mute one part because it's the full version of what could happen at the drop. It doesn't necessarily all need to happen the first time we hear it. So let's have a listen to the drop. So again, using that thinning method, let's just deactivate those clips. So that immediately, just auditioning that in its sparse form, it might not be exciting enough the first time, but if we're having it's quite a dense sound that we've got, a lot of foreground, punchy stuff, but a lot of atmospheric, washed out sounds in the backdrop too. So a classic sort of arrangement trick with doing this is that the first time we hear it, it's got some level of density to it. So I think this is probably the best first state for the drop. Yeah, so we've got the percussion running, but maybe on that second repeat of the drop, that's when we go for the unexpectedly dry version of the drop and we mute those parts out. Yeah, that could work. You might need some other rhythmic parts just to help fill that section out, but that can work. Now that's a point where it really feels like something needs to change. And I'm trying my best not to turn this into a composition, purely because we're focusing on arrangement techniques here. So I'm going to pull on some, again, time-honored techniques of what we can do. So if we class this as our start of our sort of second half of that first drop, or it's that first repeat of the drop because we're repeating it twice. So let's move into that and let's have a look at muting the bass part. So I think this is the bass part, because there's two bass parts in this song that play at different points. Yeah, so I think some rests in that bass, one, will create a variation, but secondly, create the chance for the track to breathe because the bass isn't playing throughout this second time. And then secondly, that then sort of scientifically allows the other sounds to come in because they're not being battled with this loud prominent bass sound. But also psychologically, you then hear those details in the backdrop more, so it gives a chance to shine different parts of the production. So let's just zoom into this. We'll make it unique, so I'm going to do Command and Split, so that's not going to be a repeat of that part. And let's just go in and look at muting some of these bass parts. Yeah, so I think it could be all of that really. Yeah, again, it might not be every aspect of it, but we let that happen. We do a similar repeat. It's the same thing as I was doing before. We're creating a sense of crescendo. So either a build, sort of an ascending sense of something increasing, or a descending sense of things thinning out as well. We can play around with that form of going bigger and smaller. So I'm going to have it very thinned out at the beginning, less thinned out, and play around with where the thinning goes, because that will then again create different senses of rhythm and groove. So let's just move that out. Now, you notice I split the clip before, so this one had unique properties to the other. So of course, housekeeping wise, let's give that a different color. But the other aspect is this particular part is looping at 4 bars. So what we can do is we can print that. If we use the Command and J command, or from the edit menu, if we go for consolidate, we're basically making the full 8 bars unique to all the content within the clip. So this time I've not got 4 bars that are doing this build where I've just programmed it in and then the actual clip was looping to make it 8 bars. It's actually an 8-bar clip now. So if I go to that part, it has committed, because I obviously consolidated this once I'd done the edit. So it's committed the edits I've done on the first 4 bars to the second 4 bars to make this 8-bar phrase, but I can then, again, customize that second repeat. So even if the main kind of guts of the idea is repeating as a 4-bar and then another 4-bar repeat, I'm altering just little details of where it goes. And again, it just tickles the ear and keeps the listener excited. So let's have a look at how we can alter some other aspects of this. So if I, if I just go to Alt here. Now I'm going to look at doing some kind of like sampling repeats where you trigger a sample again and again and do it faster and faster to create a sense of build as well. We could do that with all the clips or some of the clips. And if I just do Alt and click again just to reveal what's going on, there's some aspects of this I don't necessarily want to copy across. So at the moment, if I copy this across, you notice it's copying the automation at the same time. And if I move it across, if I just drag the position of that so we create a detail, that's getting copied across as well. So let's actually lock the envelopes. So the automation stays in the set. You notice that ramp down still happening, except the data, the MIDI data, is changing. So let's see what that sounds like. Again, I've just done this randomly by eye. Yeah, it's a nice fill actually. Yeah, now again, data thinning, so there's a pudoo sound just before the drop. That bit there. So I'm gonna go super small on the loop, so irritating for those who are not actually focusing on the project, but it'll give you an idea as to what detail you can go to. I'm just going to listen to that and thin out all the bits that are competing with that pudoo sound to help it sell, and also again make it more minimal before that main drop. Turn follow song off. Let's roll down and see. In fact, I don't think anything else is competing with it, so it's just those sounds at the moment. Maybe shorten that. That's great. Okay, so let's just audition that before we move on. Okay, so one more thing I wanted to cover before we finish is the concept. We've done delete time, copy time, and so on, so we can shift these blocks around and not have to grab and copy and move things out of the way to make them happen. The last thing I wanted to focus on was the concept of throwing the listener off. And a typical way of doing this could be an additional beat or an additional bar that happens before we expect what's going to happen. So if I go for, let's just go for a bar here. There's a function we can use called insert silence, which is in the create menu there. And you notice it shifts things. It's a little bit like the duplicate time, delete time, except it's just silence that it's adding. So maybe depends how unfriendly you want to be to a DJ if it's dance floor music. It could be just a beat. So if we just highlight the beat and go to insert silence, we can throw the listener off by a beat. Now, this may be a bit of a car crash in terms of it working musically, but it will demonstrate the point. Okay, so one thing. Now that was one beat, so I think it needs to be a bar, so I'm going to do insert silence and just make it the rest of that. I could undo and then do the bar. So let's try that out again. Yeah, that works to throw the listener off as well. Okay, so this has basically been about arranging songs in arrangement view. We are to the point where we understand how we can thin out data in various different workflows. We've also looked at keeping track of modified versions so we know that things are unique and we don't accidentally undo our work by overwriting it, and maybe we can borrow from that to help populate other sections and so on as well. We've also looked at the aspect of copying, duplicating time, and also inserting silence into our project so we can create unexpected pauses and rests in our data.